I am so excited to be sitting here with Eli Kramer, make sure I got the name correctly, at the Sons of Israel Synagogue congregation in Manalapan, New Jersey. Eli, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming.
So what I want to talk about and what we're really exploring this month is this notion of Jewish outreach, of how we reach beyond our community. And what fascinates me so much about this community is that recently, over the last 5 years or so, the community has transformed to become Orthodox. It was previously Orthodox way back when, that had a long period where it was not Orthodox, and now has recently became Orthodox. And I want to hear about this transformation, but before we get there, I want to just understand the world that you come from. Can you tell me about the religious universe that you grew up in?
Sure. My parents are Holocaust survivors. They met in the DP camps. My mother was a staunch Zionist. They moved to Israel. My father was a cop.
A police officer.
A police officer.
Cool.
And the reason he was a police officer is because they lived in tents in Netanya, and he was offered a job, and he asked one question: does it come with an apartment? And they said yes. What they didn't tell him was that we were going to live in a border town, which was Kfar Saba at the time, an old English fort, where they literally, like a drawbridge, closed the door at night, and we were on the border. You know, it was the Arabs were conducting raids over the border. So my parents everybody was Shomer Shabbos, kosher in Poland, but when they moved to Israel, there was no religion at all. We moved to Brooklyn when I was 3 years old, 1957. I had an older brother who was 7. And someone told my mother, you have to send your child to Hebrew school. So she sent my brother, he was 7 years old. It was a Sephardic, it was the United Sephardim Synagogue, Rabbi Marin, who later on went to the 5 towns.
Sure.
And my brother came home for the first day and said to my mother, where's the milchik and where's the fleishik? And she was taken back to her past.
To her roots.
And went to my father.
Because she grew up in a kosher home.
Oh, yeah. She said, we have to find dishes. And they went out and they bought dishes. And so we grew up there till I was about 11 years old. We were a conservative shul. You know, I went to shul every Shabbos, and
this was like really the peak of conservative Judaism in America. It was the best game in town. People were showing up as thriving congregations, and then you guys moved from Brooklyn to
Elizabeth, New Jersey, in 1965. I was 11 years old. My brother went to public high school, and I had an uncle who told my father, send him to yeshiva. So I ended up going to the JEC, kicking and screaming, starting in the 6th grade. And
at that time, that was still when the original Rav Pinchas Teitz was like leading the community.
He led the local community and the Jewish community at large.
You shared with me something that I was very moving, but it's like a real snapshot of so much of the changes that we've seen communally, that the schools were begging people, please send your kids here. Now, sadly, nearly more than half a century later, it's almost the opposite. Schools, have to apply. You might not get in. You might not. What happened when you were in JEC?
So when I was in 8th grade, it's my 3rd year there, my father was not doing well in business.
Do you remember the ballpark year we're talking?
Sure, we're talking 1967, 68.
Okay.
And we quietly enrolled in Thomas Jefferson Public High School. There was a request made for my transcripts. I was in the middle of 8th grade at JEC.
Because your father couldn't
afford it. It was $600 a year, and he was making $150 a week, and business was horrible. And my father received a phone call, and he was literally summoned by the Rav to be in his office at 3 p.m.
Rabbi Teitz, come in to his office.
And you didn't say no. And he didn't know Rabbi Teitz. Rabbi Teitz didn't know him. And he came to the office, and Rabbi Teitz looked at him. And this is the story my father related, and said, you're not happy with us, Lib Shleimi? And he said, no, I didn't say I'm not happy. And he said, well, I have a request for your son's transcript here. He's leaving. Why is he leaving? And my father didn't want to say he didn't have the money, so he beat around the bush for a while. And Teitz finally got out of him. My father said, we can't afford it. I don't have $600. With that, Rabbi Teitz ripped up my transcript.
Ripped up the transcript.
Ripped it up and said to my father, he's not your son anymore. He's my son. You're not depriving him of a Jewish education. I'm not giving him to you. And my father said, I can't do that. I can't take charity. And Rabbi Teitz said, I'm not giving you. This is a Jewish education. Too much,
he didn't want a handout.
He was depressed enough that business was bad. He didn't want a handout. And Rabbi Teitz explained to him and said, "Can you pay $10 a month?" And my father said, "I can pay $20 a month." And with that, Rabbi Teitz dismissed him, stood him up. My father walked out. I used the word mushpal. I mean, really humiliated.
Humiliated.
And Rabbi Teitz put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Reb Shlomi, don't worry. From you, I'm going to get many tuitions." And that was the blessing of a tzaddik, because 3 years later, his tide turned, and he started raising money for the shul. He joined the board. He became president.
He wasn't able
chairman.
to just cover tuition. He was actually,
No, he
in fact,
raised
true.
millions of dollars for the shul. He
Wow.
they had an annual journal that did $15,000 a year. He took it over, and the journal did a minimum of $250,000 a year for the 20 years he ran it. And he got people to donate, and then as he made money, he donated and became chairman of the school.
But what's so amazing to me is that your father, through this, did he become Shomer Shabbos?
Never.
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 Yet he was very close with Rabbi Pinchas Teitz. And what, to me, the model that I find so moving is an Orthodox rabbi who takes deep concern and care, even in non-Orthodox Jews.
The rabbi created the board of the JEC. I'm thinking now of the members of the board, and I will say that if there was one Shomer Shabbos member on the board, that's a lot.
Wow.
He took the most powerful people in the community, people who were influential, people who had money too, people who were dedicated to Yiddishkeit and understood his mission. His mission was to spread Jewish education.
Because that's the next generation.
And he made everybody understand what my father learned when I was in 8th grade. Money is not the issue. We do not deny education. We have to reach out and find people and bring them in, not wait for them to come to us and ask.
Exactly.
We have to go out and look for people.
So what's so remarkable and kind of is a perfect segue to the story that we're talking about now is you I'm sure there's a lot of life and we got to like fast forward. You find yourself in Manalapan, New Jersey. And again, I'm asking with great sensitivity and respect, but just to understand, you are Shomer Shabbos or not Shomer Shabbos? No,
not Shomer Shabbos.
You are not.
Kosher home. I'd go to shul once in a while, maybe once a month at the time, you know.
So paint me this picture. You're in Manalapan. At what point do you realize that the trajectory of this shul is not headed to a good place and we need to figure something out?
Wow. So it starts, I joined the shul in 1978, so 47 years I'm a member. We probably had 250 families there. We grew in the 90s to a peak of 500 families.
Well, that's a big shul.
No, it's a big shul. Now, we considered ourselves an Orthodox shul, but it was really known as a traditional shul. We had Orthodox rabbis. Even though we didn't have a mechitza, we had a rabbi who was secretary of the RCA, Rabbi Klein. He was a rabbi 14 years. So we had Orthodox rabbis. NCSY came here twice a year. We'd bring in portable mechitzas.
When NCSY would come, and I heard this because he's literally my mentor, one of my closest people in my life, Rabbi Yaakov Glasser. He was working in NCSY at the time, and he remembers that you guys would set up those mechitzas. You would welcome them.
People would beg to host the kids. They loved it. They loved that weekend, with that whole Shabbos where the kids were here. All our members who would attend the NCSY functions because they loved the singing, you know.
But they weren't offended by the fact that when these NCSY kids come, we have to like put up a mechitza.
No, they were excited about it. They were excited for them to come.
So take me to the point where somebody says the trajectory of we need to start thinking.
Okay, so you go back to 2015 or 16, and not just our shul. There's probably 8 or 10 shuls in this area, and membership is probably 35 to 40% of what it was at the peak in the 90s in all the shuls. We all had the same percentages.
So it's what do you attribute that drop off to? Do you have any idea?
So, you know, in the 1960s and 70s, I was a builder in this area, so I built like 1,500 homes. So I knew who was moving in. In the 60s, you had a lot of Brooklyn moving in the 70s. Late 70s, 80s, it became Staten Island. So this went from maybe 5% Jewish to Marlboro, which is the neighboring town, being 50% Jewish, and Manalapan being 40% Jewish. Suddenly, you started getting Asians, Italians moving in, less Jews moving in. And the younger Jews who moved in, we became older. Jews moved to Florida, retired, didn't have kids anymore. We had a Hebrew school with 250 kids.
Wow.
By 2016, we didn't have 30 kids.
Wow.
So what happened is you now didn't have young Jewish families moving in at the same rate.
Gotcha.
And those that moved in didn't necessarily join shuls. And you had another phenomenon here. A lot of Chabad houses opened up for the last
Sure.
15, 20 years. Well, that's shul's free.
Gotcha.
And so why join a shul? So
So in 2016, you're looking at the demographics. We need to figure something out. What's the next step?
the shul creates a strategic planning committee, a very diverse group of about 12 of us. I was on that committee. We worked for 6 months. Everybody had different assignments. People worked with Federation. One person worked with all the competing shuls in the area, not competing, neighboring shuls. We interviewed old timers, younger people, a lot of deep study, and we came out with we call our 3 columns.
3 options.
3 options. Option number 1 was the status quo.
Let's keep
And
chugging along.
But our resolve was the status quo. We'd continue. Back then, we probably had 280 members, and we were losing. Our net loss was about 10, 12 families a year.
Every year. It was
Because
going
families
down.
moving out, less families coming in. And so we said that we would last so long that way. Option number 2 was the merger. There were 2 or 3 shuls in our area that were interested in merging with us.
Were they Orthodox shuls?
One of them was conservative. One was like us.
Gotcha.
A former Orthodox shul, no mechitza, but everything else was
Pool our
unorthodox.
resources together.
And what we determined, our conclusion that we presented to the board was, okay, so we'd be twice the size. So we'd still die at the same rate. So we'd go from 200 families, 250 to 400.
Yeah.
But we'd still lose about 8% a year.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change the equation. And the third alternative was to create, not to go Orthodox first, was to create a parallel mechitza
Have like a separate
service,
minion. Yeah.
a separate minion, attract young Orthodox families, have a separate bring in another rabbi, so they felt comfortable
An
with
Orthodox
that
rabbi, yeah.
They would use the smaller room. We have a smaller room where we would have
chapel.
200 people daven normally, and we'd use a larger one. And then when that grew and we shrunk, we'd switch
We'll
rooms.
switch.
And that was the plan. It was tabled for a while, and then 2019 we enacted the plan.
So let's pause before we talk about the enacted and how people react to that and just rewind the clock. I mean, a lot of people, particularly in the Orthodox community, don't understand or appreciate how sensitive of an issue it is to either put up a mechitza, take down a mechitza. Most shuls, I grew up in the tri-state area, so your shul is your shul. I actually do remember, and most shuls have this in their history, when the previous rabbi changed the mechitza. He made it much higher. And I remember there were people who left the shul. Mechitza issues always drive a great deal of sensitivity. There are gender differences. You feel like you're being co-opted. You're becoming much frummer. I'm not going to recognize this place anymore. Take me back and just explain when the shul initially took down the mechitza, because you were an Orthodox shul. You have, I believe, Rev Gedalia Dov Schwartz, who was one of the leaders of Orthodox Jewry in America, was a rabbi here in Manalapan in this shul.
Correct.
The initial decision to take down the mechitza. So we're rewinding the clock.
So
how did that happen?
So the history of the shul was formed in 1917. They built a building in the neighboring town of Englishtown, old shul on Mechanic Street, a little brick building, 2-story. The women were in a
balcony.
In the balcony up top. There was a little potbelly stove. So the women froze on top.
There was a stove literally.
Stove was in the middle of the shul, and they hoped the heat would get up high enough. Okay. Now, I was not a member at that time. In the 1960s, Havnani, the builder, was building Monmouth Heights, and they were going to build thousands of homes in the area. And as part of a deal with the town, they made large donations of land to churches and synagogues. And the land we're on now was donated. And the congregation decided to build a new synagogue. That was in the mid-60s. I joined in 77. And I asked the question. I said, how did we determine to get rid of the mechitza? Because it was still an Orthodox shul. Nothing changed except there was no
prayer,
mechitza.
the siddur.
There was nothing in the minutes.
Yeah.
The congregation never voted. This is what I was told. By the way, the minutes were in Yiddish in those days.
Oh, yeah, I love
Yes.
that. Okay.
And there was nobody remembered a vote. It never went to a board, never went to congregation. Finally, I went to the members of the building committee, and they were sort of silent on the issue. They said, everybody wanted it that way. I spoke to the wives of the member of the building committee. I said, your husbands don't remember. And the story they told me, so I can't prove this. This is the story they told, that the wives were sick and tired of freezing all the years that they froze
Freezing
in the
cold upstairs in the
there.
balcony.
And they basically told their husbands, who were the building committee, that if they put in a mechitza, the husbands are going to freeze at night in bed.
Someone's going to be
And
freezing.
there's no one to refute it. This is the story that was around, so that's what I live by.
So a shul that has history. I mean, this is in the 1960s, so we're really half a century later, and now you're saying we're going to transform and we're going to, you want to call it become Orthodox, set up a mechitza. How did you avoid this becoming World War III that would tear apart the shul?
So we had a transition because the first thing was 2019. We went to the shul not to put a mechitza in, but
To have
put
a
a
separate
parallel
minyan.
minyan. And there was opposition. People said, are we competing with people? Are they going to take over? Like the people weren't even here, and it became them and us,
Right away.
right?
And the them weren't even here yet.
Right.
It was the conceptual them. We're going to have another minyan. And the truth is, a lot of times when you have competing minyanim in a shul, even when they're all Orthodox and they all have mechitzas, it could lead to issues. All the more so. I hear where people are coming from. They're nervous. Well,
right. But so I did most of the presentations, and I tried to sell them what I grew up in. I grew up in Elizabeth, the JC. If there were 300 people in shul on Shabbos, half were not Shomer Shabbos. People drove to shul. They parked 2 blocks away. And we were very comfortable. Rabbi Teitz knew who I was. And I was as comfortable as the person who was from. And so
when you were growing up, you didn't feel like different than the other boys.
No. I mean, we'd sleep over each other's houses. I'd go to someone's house. I'd make the mistake. I'd turn the light switch on. Nobody crucified me. They just reminded me of Shabbos. I said, well, I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
So
Wow.
it was very easy.
Yeah.
Elizabeth was a great community. It was very easy to grow up there.
So you were pitching the current members, maybe we could make this as a model into like what you grew up with in Elizabeth.
Call yourself I mean, we're all one people.
Yeah, we could do this.
But it sold. It sold. But then COVID put the plan on hold. We were interviewing a second rabbi to run that minyan because we wanted to make sure that the people we were going to attract, the Orthodox people, wouldn't feel that there might be a rabbi who was playing 2 sides of the street. Wanted them to have their own rabbi, but someone who got along with ours. But COVID put a hold on everything. When we came out of COVID, we rekindled the plan, and a few of us talked. Probably a small group of, it was 3 or 4 of us, and I remember I actually wrote, I called a white paper. And the president at the time did something very smart. I'm just thinking now. He convened a Zoom of all the past presidents who were around. So we had a Zoom of about 14 or 15 past presidents. Now I'm recalling this. And he had me present the white paper. We sent it to them to read, and it was a debate. And there were only 3 or 4 people who were strongly against it. Everybody listened. One of the people who were against it became one of the biggest advocates later on.
Do you remember what their objection was?
Well, we were saying now go to a full mechitza.
Because now it's not going to be a side minyan.
Well,
it's
first
the whole
of all,
shul.
the practicality. Nobody would want a mechitza. Everybody's been davening together with their family. They'll quit. Everybody will quit. That was the first thing,
That's
right?
a fair concern.
But the argument on the other side was, we're going to close down anyway one day.
We're
It'll
not
be 15 years, 12 years
You
from now.
saw it coming. Like
We were going to sell the building. Guys, let's get ready to sell the building in 5 years because we'll be down to 140 families. It's a huge building. And go buy a smaller one. And then people brought up merger again. And so that discussion came again. Well, okay, so we merge. And the merge shul dies over time. So it was a very healthy discussion. But the good part was you had 15 people or 16 people on the call who were all past presidents, all dedicated, all were vested in this shul.
we want this to continue.
And that became the theme. That was the overriding theme was we built something in this community, or we kept something going that somebody built 1917, right? A bunch of farmers.
This is over
got
100
this going.
years old.
You know, I always think of the day they started, their first meeting was the week Allenby marched on Jerusalem.
Wow.
And I always wonder if that inspired them.
Wow.
I always wondered about that.
The same week. That's incredible.
Same week. And so, you know, it was about preserving something. It was about the greater good. It wasn't about us.
Meaning, this isn't about Orthodox versus non-Orthodox, mechitza. This is about we need to figure out a path. We want to continue this community.
So basically, this group didn't say they're supporting it, but they said it should be presented. They said this is a practical thing. And we went to the board first, a few meetings, and there were 4 or 5 of us. Myself, Marie Sega, Bonnie Leff, another. I'm sorry, there was one. We spearheaded it.
Sure.
And we had the leave of the president at the time, Steve Cass. Go ahead, do whatever you have to do. And the board cooperated. Nobody stood in our way, even though many people were against it. People said, you'll never attract Orthodox people. All of our people quit. Well, we took a strategic approach. We met with Rabbi Schwartzberg from Yeshiva University.
Sure.
So he was in charge of, I guess, I don't know the official time, building communities.
Yeah. And he does placement of rabbis.
We met with him in Teaneck.
Yeah.
At a restaurant with Rabbi Zeitner.
Okay.
And we told him what we wanted to do. Now, he was very familiar with our shul because he lives not far from here in Highland Park, knew everything about our history. And he knew about the community, and he knew about Manalapan.
Sure.
And he knew it was a place that could attract young Orthodox. And in the middle of the conversation, he said, this will work. And he says, you see behind me? And he didn't even look back. That's where they're coming from. And we said, where? And he was pointing. There was a huge apartment building in Teaneck, and across the street was a school. And he said, these are all young families living in 1- 2-bedroom apartments who daven in this school on Shabbos. And then when they have 2 kids, they can't live in the apartment anymore. They have to move. Staten Island, expensive. Long Island, expensive.
Everything's a
Brooklyn,
fortune.
expensive. He says, the ones that can't afford $1 million, you're perfect. You're perfect. You
could revitalize and provide this community.
And the middle schools, the yeshivas are within commuting distance. And he encourages, and I have to tell you, we got incredible support from Rabbi Schwartzberg. Incredible. Resources. Gave us a lot of credibility when we were interviewing rabbis, which is very important. I mean, who's going to believe you, what you're doing? So we went to our congregation. We had a series of meetings. And finally, once the board was convinced to do it, we said, okay, let's not have a large congregation meeting. Let's do town halls. And we did 3 town halls. We had small groups of 50 or 60 people. We invited 1/3 of the congregation to each one. And we spent 2-3 hours. We presented what we want to do. And
what was the reaction when you were presenting them? Were people like a little concerned?
At any meeting, there was always be 1 or 2 people who were just negative, no matter what.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was fascinating. The reaction was, I don't want a mechitza. I want to daven my wife, but I don't want the shul to close. I would tell you that one of the group, and I'll be out, Maurice Zega, who was side by side with me, Bonnie and I, he said, I'm for this, but I'm on the believe in the shul because my wife won't daven here, if I can't sit next to her. And he was the big proponent. So we had people knowing it was going to impact their lives.
How did you make the case and explain to them why having a mechitza is actually going to help the shul? I mean, from a distance, when you hear it the first time, doesn't that make the shul more specific, more discriminating, less welcoming? What was the logic when you presented at a town hall meeting of why establishing a mechitza and becoming more traditionally Orthodox will actually increase membership?
So, first of all, our members appreciate that we had a thoughtful process. They appreciate that there was a 6-month strategic planning committee.
You're taking this seriously.
We talked about the research. And again, our meetings with Rabbi Schwartz gave us a lot of ammunition. We talked about our meetings. We availed the congregation to speak to him if they wanted. And we explained that where we want to attract the Jews from. We already had a plan reading Schwartzberg. We want to attract them from people who were looking to move in Brooklyn, people who were in Staten Island and now needed a bigger home that was expensive, people who were thinking of the 5 towns where it's very expensive, and people from the Teaneck area who now were in apartments. So we told them where our targets were. We explained to them these people were faced with the problem of having to spend $1 million to $2 million.
Yeah,
for
$1
a
million
small,
doesn't even get you that much
gets
in the 5 towns anymore.
It gets you very little. And we had housing, and we also had a reputation. People remembered NCSY. Many of these same people were here for NCSY in those days. So they understood. They understood that this could work. We also reminded them that there were a number of small shtibelech in this area already. So people had moved in and created shtibelech. There was a few small Orthodox shuls with smaller membership. So there was already a small base. So Orthodox people knew about this place, but the difference was the shuls that existed here for Orthodoxy were not membership owned. They were owned by a rabbi.
Yeah.
And people want to be owners. They want to be part of the members. They want to be part of the movers. And we didn't have to convince them. They understood what we were saying. And when we finally got to a congregation meeting, we got there after we had the 3 town halls. We let everybody speak. And what was clear was that 90% of the people didn't want a mechitza.
You don't want a mechitza.
They prefer not to have it.
Yeah.
The vote to have a mechitza, though, was 95%.
Because there's something they wanted even more.
This community that we built was more important than themselves. They put the community first, the shul first. And it was either close the shul or create a community, and we could build something. What we said was the people in 1917 built something that grew to 500 families.
And it's not going to
And by putting in a mechitza, they weren't saving this building. They were now building a new Jewish community.
Beautiful.
People would move here from this area, and they could flourish.
Let me ask you, looking back at this transition, did you lose any friends, relationships? How many people were left because of this?
So, again, we reported to our shul that Rabbi Schwartzberg said typically a tumultuous event in a synagogue, like change of a rabbi, will lose 4 to 8% membership.
Okay.
He says, this is tumultuous.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So my prediction was we lose 10% the first year. I don't think we lost 12 families the first year. I think the number was 6 or 8.
I mean, most people
and
stayed.
we had, but that's normal attrition before we
Yeah.
mechitza. So we didn't have any unique attrition. Then we had our first year and so the first 2 years though, we had promised them that we'd keep a mechitza service and non-mechitza for the high holidays, for Shul and Kippur. So for 2 years we did that, and then the rabbi came.
So you kind of on the high holidays you went back to that original plan of having 2 minyanim
for the 1 year Jews.
Sure.
The rabbi said, I don't have one congregation. I really have 2. I need to bring them together. That was the difficult thing. Now we have to go back to the congregation and say, listen, we know we promised you something, but we need to go to one service. No more mechitza. We can't be 2
And that
groups.
scared people.
It was, you promised us something.
Yeah.
And so they needed
some assurance that there aren't going to be more broken promises.
No, they needed to hear from somebody, so I'm the one who spoke.
Gotcha.
And I'm the one, rather than I said, I'm the one who made you the promise. And we can't keep our promise. We have to be one congregation. A rabbi can't go between 2 rooms. He has to have one congregation. We'll never grow. We all did this. I said, you all gave up to create a community. We can't build a community if people see 2 groups. They have to walk in and see one group. And we had no opposition. I don't know if we lost 1 or 2 families because of it. We had that service together. It was wonderful. The rabbi was in the room all day with everybody. And we're fine. And we
that's
grow.
what showed people this can work.
Yeah.
Looking back, my final question, what advice would you give to other shuls? You know, right now, the tectonic shifts are moving all across North America, particularly in the Orthodox world, the non-Orthodox world. There are real shifts taking place. For other shuls that are thinking about maybe bringing in a mechitza, bringing in an Orthodox rabbi, you know, there are different permutations of this decision, of what people would say becoming more frum. That's the scarier. What advice would you give to other congregations, other synagogues, other lay leaders who are stewarding or even thinking in the back of their heads about some transition? It doesn't even mean becoming Orthodox. It means changing the shul. What advice would you give? What do you attribute the success of this transition to?
I'm going to be very dark on this.
Please.
You know, my parents are Holocaust survivors, and Hitler didn't care if you had a beard and a kapota or if you were a totally unorthodox Jew who ate pork on Shabbos. They were all Jews. He killed them all. We're all Jews. Don't separate. It's not us and them, the Frummies or the Green or the Yeshiva group or the Hasidic group. You want to grow your Jewish community. And if you want to have a real Jewish community, there's going to be black cats, there's going to be modern Orthodox, there's going to be people who you might call apikoros, but they really aren't because they're not knowledgeable.
Yeah.
You need stop categorizing us, because everybody in the world looks as if they're all Jews. They're all the same. And we're the only ones who don't see us as being all the same. We are one people. That's all. And if every group and every shul would say, we just want to grow. We just want to create a community. A community means everybody. Again, Kol Yisrael Revim Zeh. We all have to be for each other. And that's it. And stop putting us in groups. Get rid of the silos.
Absolutely. And it's just so moving to know that bracha that Rav Pinchas Teitz gave your father, it wasn't just a financial bracha. It was a bracha that the Jewish education that your child deserves is going to pay off. And seeing the work that you're doing now and the commitment that you have, you represent something that's very important, that used to flourish and really has been diminished, which is a Jew who is a Jew first, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, Shomer Shabbos, not Shomer Shabbos, really and deeply, deeply committed. It's really unbelievable. It's the bracha in my mind of Pinchas Teitz
Can I say something
still coursing through your
from
veins.
His son, Elazar Meir, became the dean of the school.
Yeah.
His son, who just passed away last week. And he called me in. I was about 15 or 16 years old. And he said, he called me into his office. So one of our people saw you walking into White Castle. I said, yeah, Rabbi, I got a Diet Coke. And he says, listen, you have to understand, he says to me, that people are watching and they see what you do. And so my response to it was, what about all these people with the beards? They're out there, they're stealing money, they're doing fraud. And he said something to me at that point. He said, Eli, don't get confused. There's observant Jews. They're Shomer Shabbos, they're kosher, they may have beards, black hats, whatever. And then the people who aren't observant, your father, but good Jews. He works for Jewish Federation, he works for bonds, he raised money for us. Ideally, he said, we get someone who's observant and be a good Jew. But unfortunately, we have observant Jews who aren't good people, and we have
good people who aren't observant.
He says, we don't always get what we want, but we'd love to get that mix.
Thank you so much. And to see that bracha and the life that you're building and the impact that it's had on this community is incredibly moving, and just continued success in all of your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I am so excited to be continuing our exploration of B'nai Israel congregation, which I incorrectly earlier referred to as Sons of Israel. I'm sitting now with Emily Appeldorf. Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to speak today.
Thank you for coming.
So could you tell me a little bit, before you moved to Manalapan, what was the religious world that you grew up in?
So I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I grew up going to Jewish day school my whole life. Into college, I went to Drexel, and I took Hebrew through college, too.
Oh, really?
I really wanted to continue my Jewish education. Sadly, I wish I knew it more than I do.
And if I would have asked you in college, I said, Emily, what kind of Jew are you? Would you have said, I'm a conservative Jew, I'm a Reform Jew, I'm an Orthodox Jew? How did you affiliate?
So it's a very interesting question. So I lost my dad at a young age, and after that I did a lot of personal digging through religion and finding, when you face death, you ask, who is God? What's God doing? You go through this whole journey. Yeah. And I tried to find my place, and quite honestly, I didn't feel like I was anything. I felt like I was a Jew. I didn't need any sort of identifying title. And so I grew up going to what's now an Orthodox elementary school, but it was a little bit more pluralistic then. I went to a pluralistic high school, and I went to Chabad synagogue on the weekends. And
it wasn't you didn't grow up in a Shomer Shabbos home.
No, I did not. I grew up in a kosher home. We followed the Jewish traditions. We were very much in the Jewish bubble because I went to Jewish day school. We went to Shul, and a lot of my friends,
Seder, Hanukkah.
Yeah, and all my friends came from that community.
Were your friends from more observant homes than you?
Yes. All of my closest friends were calling themselves Orthodox. They were observant. They were Shomer Shabbos. They kept kosher houses. If I went to their house on Shabbat, I knew that it was no technology, and I respected that because I learned it from a young age. I learned what I could and couldn't do, and when I went home, it was just slightly different rules, and that was fine. But I was always a little bit different in the sense that I I like to ask questions, and I like to just find my own place in the religion. And because we faced loss young, me and my older brother, I only have one brother, we both kind of took our own journeys with religion. He went a completely different way than me, which I think is a very interesting psychological study somebody should do one day.
Exactly, how siblings react.
Yeah, because we were pretty
after
close in
loss.
age.
Sure.
It happened at a similar time. And I always just went with the flow of religion and tried to put myself in places that I felt comfortable, whether we're doing Havdalah or we're sitting with the mechitza, whatever it is. I just wanted to feel comfortable in the setting. And
before we get to Manalapan, if I could
Yes.
jump in, so you got married. What's interesting is you married somebody who did not have a strong background in Jewish life.
yes, so he grew up, he went to Hebrew school. He knew he was Jewish, but I think sometimes they went to synagogue on the high holidays, and that was really it. It's been a very interesting world for our lives to merge because my in-laws, this was new to them, keeping kosher and celebrating all of these holidays. I introduced a lot of different holidays that they didn't experience to the capacity that I did. And it took a little negotiating, but eventually my husband, let me backtrack. I tried to give my husband space to find his own place in the religion because I saw how my brother took his own path, and I wanted my husband to find his own place. I wanted him to feel comfortable wherever it may lead him. And I've been introducing him to things, whether it be the synagogue or the rabbi or kashrut or Jewish day school or camp, in a way where I let him take the lead, so that way he can ask all the questions he wants, because it's something that I grew up knowing about. And he's 100% diving in the deep end with it and taking the lead and learning about it and finding what makes him comfortable. And I think for me, the word of the day is comfort. It's finding where you fit without a title.
So when you and your husband, I do need to mention, he isn't just jumping into the deep end. He is getting serious awards for his commitment. He recently, you could say, because it is something you should be bragging about.
Honestly, this is going to be really tough for me because my husband already has a gigantic head, and I hope you don't cut this out. He entered the first of reboot Cholent competition of 2025.
Cholent competitions in Manalapan.
And he won.
Wow.
Yes.
And he won.
He hasn't stopped talking about it since. It's been several weeks. And his head is getting bigger and bigger as we speak.
But let me ask you, you move into Manalapan and, you have like a marriage where you have very different backgrounds. You're raising young kids. How did you make sure, or how did you integrate into this community without kind of alienating your husband and alienating yourself? Like, what brought you here? Why aren't you a member of a conservative shul or a reform shul? Wouldn't it have been easier? You're marrying somebody with no background. We have to find the one shul that just became Orthodox in the area. How did you make the choice of Orthodox versus like either thriving reform and conservative communities?
So we're big proponents of learning things the hard way. And we tried all of these synagogues and nothing felt right. We tried conservative, we tried reform, we tried everything. And we came here because we knew somebody here. And we're like, we know them, we like them. And
you had a friend here.
Just one
That's
friend.
how you chose. It wasn't a theological choice. Can you articulate a little bit more what didn't feel right? Again, we're not talking. People who have listened to us for a long time know I don't knock any movement or any stream of Judaism. That's not what we do. But I just want to understand just the experience now. When people talk about reform and conservative, they're usually talking about the state of affairs from 50 years ago. I'm just curious, your experience, you don't have to mention any specific communities or synagogues. What wasn't working for you? Like, it doesn't sound like your husband was looking around and be like, I'm too frum for this place. I mean, he didn't have a background. So what was it why didn't that stick?
That is the $1 million question. I don't know, but I do know that when I walked in this building, every single member of this community, you could feel their heart on their sleeve, and they welcomed you in such a way that you became part of the family. And that was really what we needed. We needed them to show us that no matter where we come from, no matter who we are, we're part of the family. And that's kind of what I've been trying to bring with any new member that comes, is make them feel part of the family, make their children feel part of the family. If their kid likes something, how can we bring that here so that way they feel like they made an impact on the programming or something, so people can come here and just feel like it's their second home. And I definitely did not answer your question, but I feel like
It's so interesting. I'm a little bit surprised. Is it something that you didn't think about? Like, were you not, you were a member or participated in Reform and conservative synagogues, and it didn't hold? And it sounds like when I asked the question, I looked at your face, it sounds like you never really like examined it through that lens.
We didn't really look at it like conservative, Orthodox, Reform. We looked at it as where do we feel comfortable? Do we know somebody there that we relate to, that we can fit in with that community? And that's kind of really what we went off of. We didn't really see it as,
Meaning it wasn't, you're not looking for some theological, ideological, you're just trying to find a home, a nice, warm place. So once you're of the younger generation of Manalapan. How long have you lived here?
So I live in East Brunswick, but we've been here for 6 years.
For 6 years.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in this incredible emerging community that like really brings back the chulent of Jewish life, to mention the area of your husband's success and awards.
Yeah.
But the chulent of Jewish life, where you have people of different religious backgrounds, different schools. Now in the tri-state area, shuls are segregated based on where your kids go to school, or based like how much money you make. There's so many different subtle social segregations, and you don't really feel that here. But I am curious. The shul has an Orthodox rabbi. It follows generally, as far as I can tell, Orthodox law. Were there any pressure points, triggers, difficulties that you as a couple found in integrating into Orthodox life? Because frankly, it sounds to me you didn't sign up for an Orthodox shul. You signed up for a warm shul that turned out to be Orthodox.
Yes.
And I'm curious, once you realized, like you looked around and be like, wait, this is a different thing. What did you notice? Was anything difficult or jarring or hard to like embrace or get comfortable with, or it was just like supernatural?
So I think a lot of the comfortability we had when transitioning to the shul came from the rabbi, because he has a very interesting background and he kind of built up to the religious man that he is today. And I think a little bit my husband could see that in himself. And the thing that I find most special about this community, about the synagogue, about this rabbi, is so many people in this community come from different places within their marriage. So where I came from, going to Jewish day school and going to an Orthodox synagogue, and my husband just went to Hebrew school, a lot of couples are like that.
Meaning
here.
couples where there's religious divergence in the marriage.
Yes.
The husband and wife are in different places, which
Yeah.
frankly is normal in the rest of the world. I think in the tri-state area it's a little bit less common, though it definitely happens, because institutionally it's so much stronger. So everyone's going to the same schools and camps, and the differences are they look like big deals when you grow up in the tri-state area. They're not big differences. This is a big difference.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about this community that allows mixed couples to find, I mean your educational background,
Yeah.
that it works so well?
I think we're all just on this journey together to find, we all are young couples with young kids and two very different backgrounds in the marriage. And I would be lying if I said that me and my husband don't go home and think, like, how are we going to continue this foundation of Judaism in our kids? Like, do we want to send them to Jewish day school? Do we want to send them to a Jewish camp? How frequently can we be going to shul? Should we be going to shul? What events are we going to?
You're having these conversations.
Yeah, because I think one big thing about my generation of parents is we're trying to be very mindful about every single thing we do with educating our kids.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be smart about it. And a lot of it does come back to what feels right. What do we want to keep doing? Because this is where we're happy. So we're going to go there. And a lot of my peers that joined the synagogue are doing the same thing. They're going home and having these conversations and trying to decide, like, you grew up Shomer Shabbos and Orthodox. I grew up going just to a Jewish day school. Where do we fit? They both grew up very observant in some ways. Some families grew up not Jewish and Jewish. So it's a vast spread of different places all of the couples come from, but we're all trying to find the merge for our households and find the right way to raise our children. And
I think the bullseye you just got on, where a lot of the religious expectations for a lot of shuls are generated externally from the rabbi, from community, from the school. And what I think makes what you're saying so special, and what really makes this community so special, is that the growth is really, the headquarters of growth is not at the rabbi's lectern, it's in the home. It's parents having real conversations of what do we want our lives to look like.
And I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and trying to figure out, like, I know synagogues in the area are struggling to get more families, and where are the Jews going? Because this area used to be hugely Jewish.
Yeah.
Like Eli was saying, it was a large Jewish community, and it's slowly been getting smaller and smaller. And I think a lot of it is people are marrying either out of their religion or marrying somebody who's less religious, and we're not losing them. They're just not as comfortable in different scenarios. So it's finding a way to welcome them in and be warm and comforting so they could find a place for themselves, and call it Orthodox, call it conservative, call it what you want, just a place where they can be comfortable. For me, a lot of religion has given me a lot of peace in life with crazy things that happen, and I just wanted my husband and my children to find that place for themselves, wherever it may be, whatever relationship they want to have with God, they should have. And
what's it been like looking at this through the eyes of your children?
it's been amazing.
Because they're getting a very different upbringing than you or your husband.
So my oldest son is 4, then I have a 2, and I have a now 7-month-old. And we joined when my 2-year-old was born, so we've been a member for 2 years. And when we first came, we had a 2-year-old and a brand new baby, and they were clinging to us, and they wouldn't separate from us. My husband, I tried to let him go to his side of the mechitza. I stayed on my side. We had the room that we're in right now. It's full of books, but we would let the kids run around and play.
Sure.
And I was a little nervous because my kids weren't necessarily comfortable. And then there's this one girl she was 10 years old at the time. She came up and she did what the rabbi did to me and my husband and welcomed my 2-year-old and encouraged him to be a part of the community. And fast forward to where we are now, that young woman is she's like the queen of the children.
She's like the youth director.
They follow her like she is everything. And the kids, they run around. We had to build a whole kids room.
I saw your kids room.
It's amazing. It's so much fun. And the kids can play. I made sure that there's snacks and there's activities for them. And I try to do once a month some sort of either Parsha or holiday-focused kids program. So that way the kids can learn a little something too and have that sense of connection to the shul. And we bought some really cute little sidors for them that have pictures. And now my kids love to come. They know it's Shabbat. They know they're going to come. They're going to play with their friends. They're going to play with the sidors. And it's given, my hope for making the kids comfortable was, one, building their foundation, but also in the back of my mind was giving my husband the space to find his place in the religion. And that's one thing that I actually appreciate about the mechitza is, for me, I can take my time to be by myself and find my place and with God and pray where I need to, but it's letting my husband really find his footing.
On his own terms.
Yeah, he's finding his footing. It's very personal, without I think that's the answer to the question that you asked me before, what didn't feel right in the other synagogues. I do think that because I was next to my husband, it was almost a distraction for me, and I couldn't be on my own. And the mechitza almost forced me and him to find our personal place in the religion. And now we're at a place where before our kids were clinging, we were in and out of the room. We would be literally
just
schwitzing.
chasing.
Yeah, we'd be schwitzing by the end of Shabbat, by the end of Shul. Now our kids are running around. We have had, my husband gets to go pray. He gets to be a part of the service. He is learning that he's a Levi, so now he's going to be a little bit more involved in the service. And he's like, oh, shoot, I really need to learn some more.
No, but that's so remarkable. And you should know what you said is so profound. When in the 1950s and 60s, when shuls all over the country were really having battles over mechitzas, the head of Yeshiva University, Rabbi Soloveitchik, wrote a letter that was published about the importance of mechitza. And what he emphasized was something very interesting to me. It wasn't, the halacha and how tall it has to be. He emphasized the experience of prayer actually being creating a little bit of loneliness, that you're not next to your spouse, that you're coming before God, not as a family, but having that individual experience. Like he almost said, look, we have a emphasis on communal prayer, but we also want to preserve almost like coming before on your own terms, on your own footing, which is so remarkable. What I'm curious about is to hear, what do your friends who you grew up with, what do your in-laws, your mother is still alive?
Yes.
Your mother, what do they think is going on with you and your family? Do they look at you, and do you self-identify as the term we sometimes use is a Baal Teshuvah? But you're not giving me those vibes at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not really big at putting names on things, and the funny thing is, growing up, I grew up with all of these Orthodox friends that grew up Shomer Shabbos, they grew up kosher, they grew up going to Orthodox shuls every single week.
Camps, probably.
Camps,
the whole
yes,
thing.
the whole 9 yards. And now I'm one of the few who is a member of a shul. I'm one of the few that goes every week, has
a lot
kosher
of your
house.
friends who grew up very observant, they looked for the first exit sign.
Yeah, and they keep saying, we'll have a kosher house when we have kids. We'll see. I hope they do, because I think for me, it's special. But I'm one of the few who is almost building a similar life to what they had for their upbringing. And my mom is plotting.
Really?
She has never been happier in her life. Yeah, she's
not like, my daughter's becoming
no, she's
super
so happy.
from me, Orthodox. Like, the word is that a dirty word? Would you?
No. I mean, I am very stubborn and independent, so I will find my place and make sure that I'm doing what's comfortable for me and my family. So my mom knows that, and she sees more observancy as a great thing. She gave everything to my Jewish education, and she's so happy that it actually continued through the generations. And my kids, we just recently transitioned them into a Jewish day school, and it's been 2 months. It's been the best 2 months of their lives. They
love it.
Yes, and every time they come home, I could cry, because they say, literally last week, my 4-year-old was singing songs about Tu B'Shvat, and he painted a tree, and he's like, I'm painting a tree for Tu B'Shvat. And the fact that he knew that and learned that in 2 months was just, it brought me back to my roots and my Jewish day school, and it reminded me, there's so much dark in this world, and this is such light, and it's so beautiful and so meaningful, and if I could give that to my kids, we will do whatever we can to do that. And it's been amazing. Last night, he was teaching my husband the Hebrew words for leg and hand and head, and I was like, you're 4, and you've been at this school for 2 months. How do you know all of this already? I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the school. I'm impressed with my kids. It's beautiful watching it, and my mom is loving it. And my in-laws, I think for them, it was probably the hardest transition, because they were the ones that came from very little. One of my mother-in-law's grandparents were kosher, so it brings her a little bit back to that. But for them, a lot of it is about financial comfortability and making sure you're being smart with your finances. And because of that, you would immediately think public school. That's how you save all of your money. And Jewish day school is very expensive. Unfortunately, it's not $600 a year like Eli's dad had it. As soon as he said that, my jaw dropped.
I'm like, I'll take that deal.
I'll take $600 a year.
A year.
Shoot, I'll take $600 a month.
Yeah.
So that was the first concern, like,
how you afford this?
Yeah, you have to be smart financially. And within, I would say, days, they were like, this was the right thing. They're seeing my kids so happy, building a knowledge that they decided wasn't the right knowledge to give to their kids. And it's been beautiful watching all of our families convene in one way and finding the right path for us. I love it. And the fact that my kids ask to come to shul every week and they're excited to go to school and all of these little things that I'm interweaving into their lives to make Judaism like a core component of it is just making them what I feel to be better, nicer, well-rounded people, and I'm loving watching it.
My last question, because it's such an incredible story and what you represent, I think is so important in this moment right here, post-October 7th. There's so many people who are awakening, and what we repeat over and over and over and over again is that the purpose of Judaism is not to fight anti-Semitism. We fight anti-Semitism so we can focus on the purpose of Judaism. And there is an awakening right now where people are looking around and say, okay, we've experienced anti-Semitism, people of our generation, for the first time in a public space. We're in the headlines, and there are people waking up now, and they're saying, what now? What should I do with my Jewish life? And rabbis have always had their answers. Well, start following every rule of the Torah, and et cetera, et cetera. From your eyes and among your friends and people who are all on their own journey, what advice would you give them to ensure that their journey and their making peace and finding a home in their Yiddishkeit doesn't tear apart their family, but actually brings their family together?
That's a big question. I think for me, one thing is Rabbi's been doing these like monthly parenting courses, helping us with things like this. So it's nice to have somebody to be your backboard. But for me, it's about really being in conversation with your spouse and making sure you're continually talking about what the other person feels comfortable with, because I knew that my husband was going to be a little nervous about Jewish day school because of the expense of it, and I wanted to be careful with that. And it became something that he introduced to the conversation, and I gave him space to find his own place and find his own comfortability, and allowing the conversation and the open-mindedness in my marriage has been key. And I think my kids see that, and the partnership, it's a lot of just talking. And
do your friends reach out to you for advice? Because you're creating such a beautiful family that a lot of people don't allow themselves to just see and embrace the bracha right in front of them, and you have it. Your friends who grew up with you, who have probably in a very different place in their lives right now, do they ever ask you, like, tell me your secret, what's going on?
They do. They do ask me, and I say, there is no secret. I don't know. I'm just doing what makes me happy. And I listen to my husband, because we come from such different places, and we have to respect each other. And without that, we would be butting heads all the time. So it's a lot of compromise and finding what's right for both of us. And sometimes one person has to go a little bit longer on a journey to meet the other person. So maybe my husband's journey is a little bit longer to finding his place in Judaism because he went on it a little bit later. But I'm being open and I'm being patient. And as long as you're kind and considerate to the people you're in the conversation with, I feel like that's the most important thing. And that's what I want to teach my kids, is to be kind and patient and
patient with people's journey and people religious. There's a beautiful passage of Talmud that is actually in the very first page, the introduction to a very famous work. The first Rebbe of Chabad wrote a book called the Tanya. And he includes a very brief line that really has its source in a Talmudic story in the tractate Eruvin. And it's the story of a rabbi who's looking for directions. And a young boy says there are two paths. There's one path it's a shortcut, but it's going to take you much longer. And there's another path that's very long, but you'll get there much faster. It's the path that's long that's really short, or the path that's short that's really long. And nowadays, I think a lot of people growing up, we like the shortcut, but the shortcut, a lot of times, it'll take you much longer to find that peace. Instead, what you are doing, family first, connecting to your spouse, finding the joy in your children, it's a little bit longer, but you know what? It'll get you there much faster.
Patience is everything.
Emily, I cannot thank you enough for
Thank
speaking
you.
with me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
I am so excited to be sitting here with someone who I go back a ways with, Rabbi Ken Brodkin. What's the first name that you usually go by?
Go by Ken.
You go by Ken Brodkin, and it is really such a privilege and pleasure because I knew you way back when you were in Portland, Oregon, which was your previous pulpit. I spent a Shavuos with you. You just sent me the schedule. And now you are here in Manalapan, New Jersey, a shul that is, every rabbi has different challenges that they have. But the challenge that you had is you came into the shul right after it kind of transitioned into a mechitza Orthodox shul. And I was wondering, when they were reaching out and talking to you, were you nervous about taking a shul in Manalapan? It's not in the tri-state area, like in the typical sense. It's in New Jersey, but it's not tri-state area Yeshiva League Judaism. When you first came to the shul, why did you accept this job? Meaning, you had a great setup in Portland. You come here, and they're transitioning. Why jump in a shul that's still trying to figure out its identity?
Were you nervous? That is such a great question. And I look back to that time, and it was such a moment of excitement because I did see in this synagogue a place that was going through change and transition and even facing a crisis. And knowing myself that I wanted to come back to the East Coast, I really felt that coming to a place that is facing change and transition at a very important time in its history was very, very exciting. And I think that it raised a lot of questions for the people that were here in the synagogue. How do we face this change? How do we go through this change? And some of the most exciting things that I went through in Portland, of course, were change and transition. We changed locations soon after I moved to Portland.
Sure.
We went through a major community transition when we founded a day school there. And so I really felt excited about the opportunity to help a community in this process.
And in a lot of ways, if I could jump in, to start even earlier, in some ways you are the perfect person to be the rabbi of B'nai Israel in Manalapan, New Jersey, because you have a fascinating trajectory of your own. You were not raised in the Orthodox community. Tell me a little bit about the religious world that you were raised in.
So I was raised in what I always considered to be a typical or regular American Jewish family. It was central Massachusetts. I was raised in a very strongly identified Jewish family. My parents always knew that I was going to marry a Jewish girl. They cared a lot about Israel. There was a conservative synagogue in the town that I grew up in, and it was a big part of our lives growing up.
Like a traditional conservative.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was the 80s and 90s, so it wasn't traditional like this synagogue was, but it was a different time. And I guess that I had the opportunity to be in a lot of different spaces, even in my teens and going into my 20s, where I was drawn forth into Yiddishkeit, into mitzvos, into Judaism from a conservative shul to growing up having an observant friend. Or I spent 6 weeks in Israel after my junior year in high school, and then eventually went back to Israel for a year on the Nativ program.
From the conservative movement.
Yeah,
right?
and I was in the Hebrew U overseas program. I was on Kibbutz Saad for 4 months.
You were a deeply engaged teenager with your Jewish life and identity.
I was quite engaged. I became especially engaged after my junior year of high school. But even around the time of my bar mitzvah, I was very, very engaged in it, and I got very into learning and Hebrew and the Jewish people. And so wherever I went, it's sort of the journey continued.
But what really fascinates me is, again, when did you switch denominationally where you started to identify as Orthodox? Because something that has always fascinated me is your journey as a Baal Teshuvah, you had a stop in the main yeshiva that you studied in. I found fascinating because it's not a place that you would associate where Bali Tshuva are going to study. You learned in Toras Moshe under Rav Moshe Meiselman.
And
That's
Rav Moshe Torsky.
That's a very serious Rav Moshe Torsky, Hashem Yikom Dama, one of the true greats who was murdered in Har Nof in the synagogue attack. But explain to me. You became Orthodox. You went to Toras Moshe. If you gave me that bio, I would either assume that you are the biggest kanoi zealot, like very intense and reject and not be able to pastor non-Orthodox Jews, or you would become fully, like a balabas and not a rabbi at all. Instead, you're a rabbi for kind of not as deeply educated Jews as you grew up. So just explain to me your transition to formal Orthodoxy.
Okay, there's a few pieces there. So one critical piece is that when I did come home from Nativ when I was 19 years old, I did decide that I wanted to be Shomer Shabbos. And once I decided that I was going to be Shomer Shabbos and I went to Brandeis University, I immediately gravitated to the Orthodox community. I was part of BOO, the Brandeis Orthodox organization. That was my chevra. And I happened, so that was perhaps
was it an ideological switch, or just they were the ones who were creating the Shabbos experience that was strongest?
It was both. It was definitely an ideological switch, but also the community that was keeping Shabbos and that was into learning were people that had gone to yeshivas. And so I went to Brandeis, and I at that point I saw myself as an Orthodox Jew. There was a critical figure in my life who I'm still very close with, which is Rabbi Benji Jacoby, who helped me during my time at Brandeis and got me into yeshivas. He was part of the reason that I ended up connecting with Toras Moshe. I mean, interestingly, both Rav Meiselman and Rav Torsky were from Boston. And so I had been at the Tolner Rebbe in Brookline. I had seen Rav Moshe Torsky there. And on the one hand, I really was drawn to Toras Moshe. It was a very formative, incredible experience of my life. It's still, though, even being at Toras Moshe, I think I always knew deep down that I wanted to work with American families and that I wanted to work with, I guess, what I now look at as kind of regular American families.
Now, you didn't want to be the youngest of Woodmere was not your.
It was never. It was never really on my horizon. I'll tell you an interesting story. In 1999, I was about 8 months married, and my wife and I went to Kansas City to spend an entire Pesach with my wife's sister and brother-in-law. And we're there in Kansas City, and I'm looking around the community. It's like, this is great. And we're at the Pesach table, and there's a convert, and there's an intermarried couple, and a frum couple, and maybe people are asking me some questions, and I'm like, I'm sold.
Loved it.
I loved it. I'm like, I've got to be the rabbi of Kansas City. And I mean, that never happened. But even when I was dating my wife, when she said to me, oh, my family's from Jacksonville, I was like, oh, yeah, I want to be the rabbi of Jacksonville someday. See,
that is so important. I actually recently wrote about this, of how unfortunately this has been lost, where I feel, and again, it's always dangerous to overgeneralize, but I feel like a lot of the young rabbis who are emerging in this generation, particularly in the right-wing yeshiva university world and all the yeshivas who produce rabbis, they produce Orthodox rabbis for Orthodox Jews. And that was never your goal. You're never, I want to find some in town, tons of infrastructure, and just be able to glide my way into an existing community. You always want a community that had that diversity, that had Orthodoxy, but also non-Orthodox Jews. You wanted that.
And it was part of the beauty that I saw. I remember being at an Orthodox professor's Seder table in Brookline, but having Russian Jews around the table, non-Orthodox Jews around the table. And I think that is part of the beauty of Klal Yisrael, is it's an incredible eclectic group. And I think also a very big part of the rabbinate is just being in the trenches of Jewish life and being with the people. And the people are all over the place. That's the reality. And I just had so many experiences, even when I was in Toras Moshe, where I once did a Shabbaton in Western Massachusetts. And I slept over the house of a guy who was like the chief balabas. He was maybe the president of the synagogue that I was leading the Shabbaton at. And his wife was not from. And I was staying there, sleeping in their house, and I just felt like I could relate to these people in a way that I wanted to be present in their lives and I wanted to serve them.
It's an incredible model because it's not just talk. Like, I've known you for many, many years, and it's something that you really embody in everything that you do, which is why it's not a surprise that you were so successful and that you are so successful in kind of this revitalization of B'nai Israel in Manalapan, New Jersey. But I'm curious, when you first arrived here, how did you avoid being the new scary Orthodox rabbi in town? I'm looking at your resume. You know, aside from you have the name Ken, which is a good tell. It's like, I'm not that from. I go, chill. I have a background. I had a childhood.
Right.
But more than that, you know, I remember, maybe you stopped. You used to wear a black hat.
I dived with a hat.
Yeah, you dived with a hat. You came from Torah's Moshe, and now you're showing up in Manalapan. The nightmare of anybody is like somebody coming in and is going to make this into a yeshiva community. That's the only way we can survive, and people who don't have that background or capacity feel pushed out. How did you ensure when you arrived here that nobody would think that their Yiddishkeit is being threatened?
It's a very interesting question, and it touches upon a number of issues. I've actually had the experience sometimes in my career where when someone first meets me, they automatically assume that I'm out to change them or I don't accept them for where they are. And they soon learn that that's not the case. I really strive to connect with people where they are. I also had the experience of community development in Portland for a number of years. And I think a really key thing over there was just that, hey, we're here to develop the community and to be with the people where they are and to develop it as it should naturally develop over here. And I saw a real beauty. Like when I came to interview here in Manalapan, I thought the Shul was beautiful. I walked in, I loved the place. Even before the kids' room existed, I saw the kids' room. I looked at the Balabatim here. I saw people that I would naturally love. They looked like people that I had grown up with. And so in my conversation and real interaction with people, I really do love the people, and I really do value them for who they are, where they are, and that is genuine.
It wasn't a show. I mean, you didn't come in and like in the backyard be like, we'll put the community kollel in this room, and then I'll start my. You really loved where the people were at the time. I'm curious, when you came, do you look at your? Let me rephrase that. What is your relationship to Kiruv? Now, it's interesting. This is a series called Jewish Outreach. I'm not talking to any Kiruv professionals. Mm-hmm. We could do a separate series on Kiruv as a form of Jewish outreach. Mm-hmm. But what always surprised me is in Portland, and now it's here. On the one hand, you're deeply Orthodox. You follow halacha, and you believe that that is the future. On the other hand, you're always like, I want to accept you where you are. How does that translate into a philosophy of Kiruv? Like, you go up them, okay, I want you to meet you where you are. Okay, you meet them 2 months, 6 months, a year later. Okay, Shabbos, let's go. It's time to start keeping Shabbos. Why are you not looking? What is your relationship to moving the needle and increasing observance?
Well, I think growth is something that needs to be organic, and it's something that you don't know how or when people are going to grow. I once was sitting with a couple who was intermarried, and they sort of wanted my words of strength that they could go forward and convert. I didn't even think that they could necessarily do it. But I told them, even though at that time, this is many, many years ago when I was a very young rabbi, I said, yes, you can go and do this. Sure enough, they did it. And it surprised me, and I realized you have to believe in people. And you have to believe in the long term that they're going to find their path. I think one of the really critical things is that presence is power. If you want to have an impact in people's lives, you need to be present in their lives. You can't be impactful without being present. And you have to accept someone for who, as they are, in order to be present in their lives. If you don't accept someone, if you're judgmental of them, they're not going to want you in their life all that much.
This is such an important piece because I think it's something that a lot of rabbis have lost, and I've actually gotten this question myself. I participated in a in a rabbinic retreat. I think I even told you the story. It's part of a rabbinic retreat, and the retreat was rabbis who were talking about how to reach burnt out FFBs, people who were raised from birth, went to yeshiva, and now they're burnt out. And the first presenter did a role play. You know, he came in, I'm 35, my name's Ephraim, I'm a nursing home administrator, and like, how do you reach me? And the rabbis were doing it. And I presented afterwards. And I was just thinking as they were doing the role play, I said, this is off. Why is it off? Because we're thinking about religious burnout, religious struggle as something out there. Mm-hmm. And I went around and I said, Chevra, rabbis, my esteemed colleagues, we don't need to think about the people out there. We can access that here around the table. When was the last time you were burnt out religiously?
Right.
It must be you can access this. And what has always moved me about you is that it's not you're the rabbi in some ivory tower and the people are, you know, down there and you're trying to like socially engineer how everyone's going to be the perfect Orthodox Jew. You go down and you reach the people. But the pushback I got, and why I'm telling you this story, is somebody told me and said, well, you can't meet them where they are because then you're validating where they are. Mm-hmm. Now you have somebody who's driving to Shul every Shabbos. If you know that and you don't, you know, bang the gavel on the table and say, this is inappropriate, you got to do better, you're going to end up validating a much lower level. So I'll tell you what I answered, but I first want to hear, what would you respond to that? How do you balance meeting people where they are but still being, you know, growth oriented?
Well, first of all, I mean, I do think it is very basic that people need unconditional love. If you think about it, this is a parent. Your children, whoever they are, they want to be loved unconditionally, and that's the same. The same is true of congregants or members of Bnei Yisrael. But I think, though, that there's really not that implied acceptance because, after all, we are out there every single day pushing Yiddishkeit. We're teaching Torah. We are having Torah classes. We're advertising Shabbos. We're in every way possible. We're advancing a message of getting people more involved and more knowledgeable and more connected to other people who are observant or who are tzaddikim. And so I think by default, we are doing something that is really saying, look, we really do have these goals and these guideposts that we're looking towards. It's just that we want to give you the opportunity to be here and for it to not feel unnatural and to be able to approach growth in a natural, organic way that is going to be sustainable and is going to be real for who you are.
It's so beautiful because it's more or less what I responded to the rabbi. Somebody who I admire deeply said, the issue with reaching people where they is that you end up validating, and you can't validate where because they're not in a correct place. And I said, the analogy I gave right away is I said, imagine somebody came to your shul one Shabbos. You never met him before. He's a rabbi from a different community and started giving you feedback on how to run your shul. You know, your mechitza's too low and you speak too. Right away, you'd be like, get out of here. Before you understand who I am and what I've dealt with and where I've come from and what we're trying to do here, you can't receive any sort of feedback. It will come off very adversarial. And what I've always found so beautiful about the Yiddishkeit that you really demonstrate is you first get to know the person. Let me understand where you are. So then the growth, the organic growth, I think happens naturally. It's not you demanding them, this is your next step. You're surrounded by next steps, and you'll go when you need to.
Right, and it's so important to get to know people, and you also don't know what the next step is. And one of the things that I've tried to encourage my students or my congregants in is the idea that you don't have to know the ultimate outcome, but if you have an opportunity for growth, an area of Torah you want to learn, a mitzvah you want to do, take that opportunity, because I guarantee you if you get to know one aspect of Torah, you're going to love that, and then you'll want to expand upon that. If you connect to one mitzvah, you'll connect to another mitzvah. Of course, Chazal say that, mitzvah gereris mitzvah. So I think it's just giving people the permission that they can connect to Judaism. And look, there's 613 mitzvahs.
I'm jumping in. It's not just permission. It's the confidence and safety. A child is not comfortable exploring a new territory if they're uncomfortable. They'll cling to their parents' leg. You cling to the status quo if you don't feel safe.
Right.
And when you create an environment of safety, then people are willing to explore, to venture out. What else is out there? Let me try something new. Let me show up to a class. It's built on that deep knowledge, that visceral knowledge. They understand me. They're not going to present any next steps that are going to tear apart my life.
That is so true. And as people come from all sorts of different backgrounds here, and I just see that you just don't know what's going to be and where it's going to be. Many situations, maybe an intermarried couple may come. They need to have, as you say, that safety, that place where they can come and connect. Also at a place where frum people are davening and growing and having a serious relationship with Hashem.
Let me ask you a third rail question that used to really animate shuls. Again, a lot of my Yiddishkeit is filtered. I grew up in the 5 towns, but both of my parents came from real small town communities. North Adams, Massachusetts, my father, my mother in Portland, Oregon. And one of the big questions that animated Orthodoxy, particularly in the 1950s and 60s, was whether or not to leave parking lots open on Shabbos. This was a major issue, especially after the conservative movement allowed formally driving on Shabbos, which really changed the demographics of American Judaism. How do you approach that question?
So the parking lot here is open, and I think just a really critical thing over here is that, so first of all, I just want to say that I'm not here to paskin or rule for any other community. I have my own rebbeim that I go to and I speak with about how to run the synagogue.
But walk me through how you approach that issue.
Well, the way that I approach the issue is that, first of all, when I came here, the synagogue did say, look, we have an open parking lot, and that is something that is important to us. Now, my understanding was that you can be an Orthodox Union synagogue, which I guess is a mark of acceptance, and still have an open parking lot. I guess the main thing that I see is that, look, this is where the community is. This is what's happening right now. The people, by and large, drive to the synagogue. If that's something that will change, it will be something that's organic. Who knows who's going to be here in the future? It may be something that develops in a different way,
or in a different generation, or like the kids,
right? Or in a different generation. At one point, when my wife was growing up in Atlanta, there was a point at which the synagogue parking lot was open. The fact that there is an open parking lot at the synagogue does not mean that we cannot help people to grow in Torah and mitzvahs. In fact, I also have had the experience, for example, of a congregant saying to me, well, I actually really love the fact that your parking lot's open because my non-frum family comes and they feel comfortable. And I think that is something that is unique. I do see what's happening here isn't necessarily the right thing for every shul, but I do see a lot of synagogues from shuls that I might go to that I really love davening in, but where I really feel, this really wouldn't make sense for a lot of the people that are in my shul or the types of families that I'm striving to work with. I can tell you that what we have right here does feel like it really makes sense. It feels that people are growing, and it feels like there's a path forward, and we'll see in what ways the community continues to develop.
What are the markers that you look for that give you a sense of confidence that we're headed in the right direction?
So there's been a very big change in this shul that's happened over the past couple of years, and that is that there is now a group of young families that's really...
Meaning aside from the mechitza.
Okay, of course the mechitza.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
absolutely.
a big deal.
Right. No, the mechitza,
But since then, there's been a big change.
Right, so we had to complete the transition of the mechitza, and by the way, I have to tell you, I think Eli said it, we had the full mechitza experience. I wasn't in a different room with my mechitza minyan. It was all together, all mechitza. People loved it. That was great. So that we've completed that transition. That everything inside the sanctuary is functioning al pi halacha, right? I think though that as far as what we're seeing that's really positive is that there's been a number of families, people in their 30s, 40s with little kids, 2 years old, 3 years old, that come to shul and they love it. They have an amazing experience here, and I can just see it in the way that they're involved. I can see it in the way that people are a part of leading things here. Now, of course, the rabbi sets the culture, and that's really important. At the same time, there is a grassroots community effort going on here, and we have families that are showing up. Their friends are here. This is where they're connecting, and they're helping to lead programs, and hopefully they're going to base themselves here, and that's something that leads to so many opportunities for growth, for connection to Am Yisrael,
When
growth
you
in mitzvos.
when you first got here, what were, if any, what were the primary pressure points about Orthodoxy? You came in, the mechitza was already kind of set, and then they looked for it was still a separate minyan for the first years for the high holidays. What were the issues that the older members, the newer members? Do you have any memories of like, you need to explain Orthodoxy to me? You need to. This is triggering me. This is bothering me. This is not working for me.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I discovered something after I moved here that I didn't necessarily anticipate or know about. I'm used to the issue of mechitza being something that you have to explain. Perhaps people have issues with that. They see it as being somehow regressive, or
Yeah.
they have issues with it. But what I found when I came here was that it was more like, let's say, older members, people who had been here 20 years, 30, even 40 years, were saying, it was in Sons of, when our B'nai Israel, Sons of Israel, this is not the Sons of Israel we know. We come to synagogue on the high holidays and sit next to our wives and sit next to our husbands. And that was the memory that people had. And it was something that, like, so much of their emotions were tied up into that.
I mean, I have the same. I mean, the people who you go through a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with, because
Right.
the seating charts in my shul
Right.
were always different for high holidays.
Yes.
And there was a special bond that,
Yes.
like, we sat at the same table. I remember Jerry Hollander, the Pills,
Right.
my grandfather,
Yes.
like, and there was like a special. So 1 year to not have that same arrangement is jarring.
Right. And it actually reminded me of something that happened back in 2006 back in Portland when we moved the synagogue. And it was such an emotional issue because people were so emotionally connected to the old building. But it was like, hey, we had to go to people and say, hey, look, we could have a real beautiful future, but we've got to have the synagogue in the Jewish community. And I think that was the same thing over here of saying, look, there's so much that's beautiful here, so much that's awesome, but we have got to really be part of the Orthodox community. We've got to plant our flag in Orthodox Jewry. That also touches upon our conversation with the parking lot, that the mechitza is so important in doing that. The mechitza really says you're part of that. So I think that was something that we had to deal with. And it's interesting because the younger families, not even necessarily Orthodox, were pushing. They didn't want to see these two separate minions. They wanted to see one minion with a mechitza. Even people who really have no background in Jewish learning or the Orthodox community. So it was a lot. That was a large effort that we had to make sure that we had one service. But that was.
Was there language that you used to introduce the first time that you were having one service? Everybody's together. You have a mechitza. Are there words that you share to kind of like frame this new era?
So yeah, I have to go back. We definitely did have language. I mean, one of the things that we did, my president at the time, Jay Fields, really encouraged me to go door to door and talk to people about this.
Did you do that?
Oh yes, I went out
Door to door, one family at a time.
First of all, I probably had, again, this is the transition to go what we called full-time mechitza. We're going full Orthodox.
Full-time mechitza. You had a part-time mechitza.
Yeah, well, we're going full Orthodox, right?
Yeah.
So I probably had about 40 or so face-to-face meetings.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. It was months. And then
If I have a day where I have like 3 meetings back to back, I need like to take off the next day.
Right. So it was, Starbucks in people's homes. Then it transitioned to phone. Then it got to a point where we were just call anyone who I hadn't spoken to, hey Joe, reaching out to you. At this point, people knew that was happening.
Yeah.
Because once we had the support of people, we talked to people who maybe were bigger stakeholders, you might say. But at a certain point, it was happening, and we'd say, hey, look, we're making this transition. This is happening. We want to be there for you. We want this to be great for you. One of the things that we did was that We wanted to show people that this is going to be even better. It's going to be even greater than the past. And so instead of focusing all of our energy of like, well, we've got the mixed minyan, right? And then rabbis running the mechitza minyan in the simcha room, we said, no. There's one minyan, but we're going to have other experiences. This is going to be a diverse, experiential synagogue with multiple portals. We had a learner's service with Rabbi Uzi Bier and my son-in-law. We did an open kiddush room on Rosh Hashanah.
Just like snacks, cakes.
Yeah, people could go in. And so he said, look, I understand that you like to sit next to your wife. Well, look, we've got a wonderful kiddush room where you can go and schmooze and have a good time over there. We had great. We also had just broken out our new kids room.
It's so incredible because the language that I use, it comes from an article that I wrote, is that the Jewish community, we're so good at hanging up, and in almost every room, there's not one in here, I'm looking for it, there's always these neon exit signs.
Right.
And so much of Jewish life is seeing these neon exit signs. Where if you do X, you're going to fall apart.
Right.
And I said what we need is a community that just has neon entrance signs.
Right.
Different points of entry, which is exactly what you've done. And I'm curious.
And that's Abraham's tent.
Exactly. Just entryways.
Yes.
Aside from mechitza, were there other hot button issues that you had to deal with as you went full Orthodox?
Well, that's a good question. I think that we did go through a rebranding. We updated the name from Sons of Israel to B'nai Israel. That was a little bit of a hot touch point.
Okay.
I didn't feel that the brand of Sons would really be broad and inclusive enough.
Yeah, I hear that.
And so...
I never think of that, but like...
Yeah, I mean, look, say, hey, we're a community. This is Sons of Israel.
What about the daughters?
Well, would you call it the daughters of Israel? So I'd explain to people, B'nai Israel is the Hebrew, it's plural. I think maybe that was symbolic of the change. Mm-hmm. I don't think people really think about it so much anymore. But I think a lot of it also is just really having a lot of conversations with people about what it means to develop community and how this is such a long-term endeavor. Because essentially what you have is you have a wonderful synagogue here, but it wasn't like you had this ingrained group of Shomer Shabbos families living around the synagogue to create that.
You have to build that core.
You have to build that core. And so I think that there was a little bit of emotional, maybe sticker shock of saying, oh, wow, we're really doing this. Yeah, and this is really a long-term thing. But at the same time, while it's such a long-term endeavor, I really wanted to give people short-term payoffs. I really wanted people to see, we've had the best Hanukkah party in 2023 that we've had.
And that'll hold them over. If they see that Hanukkah feels different, that Purim feels different.
Right, things start to feel different. And we just had a beautiful Friday night dinner for 100 people this past week for Shabbos Shira. We had a musical Kabbalah Shabbos. It was, so there's constantly things happening.
Reminders of that. There's great stuff happening here. It's not just change, different, but there's positive, joyous things happening here.
And that is it. That is what's happening. So it's not even so much change now as saying, okay, we are an Orthodox synagogue. We have the mechitza. Let's focus on growth.
I want to ask you one question that may be on the back of people's minds, and you don't need to use names in your answer. Mm-hmm. But when you accepted this shul, you knew at the time when you accepted that there would still be a minyan, a service without a mechitza.
Correct.
What do those type of complicated halachic issues like that? That's not frum. Are you a non-Orthodox rabbi? Who do you turn to, and what do they say? Unless you just trust your intuition and judgment.
So I definitely look to the Rabbanim of our generation. I had a really powerful conversation with Rav David Cohen. First of all, I should say I went to Rav Mordechai Willig, who's the head of the RCA. And I have a history of the RCA of Smicha from Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz, who was
a rabbi.
When
I saw his name, my head exploded. I'm like, he was the chief dayan in Chicago.
Yes.
What? Started Manalapan.
Yeah. So Gedalia Dov Schwartz is not with us anymore. I think he's smiling from Shemayim about this. But so I did go to Rav Mordechai Willig, and he was very supportive. I also went to. I'll tell you about two conversations. One was was with Rav David Cohen.
From Gvul Yavitz in Brooklyn.
Yes, and he was very, very encouraging. I'd wish that I had written down the Gemaras that he mentioned, but the thing that I took from the conversation was that he was saying to me, if you are going to a situation to improve and to teach and to ultimately fix it, you don't know if you'll be successful, but if that's your purpose, that cannot be wrong. That has got to be a good thing for you to do, and go and try to see if you can achieve that. If you can't achieve it, that's a different. You'll have to see.
But go, even if it's not a guarantee.
Even if it's not a guarantee, and it's interesting. My family has had a big relationship with Aaron Lopiansky over the years, and of course, I was speaking with him. He wanted me to speak to Rav David Cohen, which of course I wanted to do, and once Rav David Cohen said that, he felt that that was something that was really appropriate to rely upon, and he was supportive of this effort, and even after I moved, he was supportive. For example, there was a house minyan at that time that I moved here for Friday night. Rav Aaron Lopiansky encouraged that chevra to move their house minyan into my shul.
Really?
So yes, so that we could,
even though there was a non-Orthodox minyan still taking place here.
Again, it was taking place on 3 days a year.
Gotcha.
And the goal was that.
But he said, "Come back."
But for that, so and again, at this point, there's no longer any mixed services. That's not what it is. But he, Rav Aaron Lopiansky was involved in helping with that.
Former 1840 guest, and I love what Rav David Cohen. I love what Rav David Cohen said to you. Meaning, isn't that the whole point of what we're doing here? Isn't that the whole point of being a Rav? Is to elevate.
Your whole purpose, he said, Rabbi. You're going in order to be metaken, to fix it. How can it be wrong for a rabbi to go to a synagogue and fix the situation?
It's really, really incredible. I have an interesting question that's really more about you than the community. When you awaken to Orthodoxy, you really immersed yourself in the world of the yeshivas, in a rabbinic world. You study Torah from Rav Moshe Tversky, Hashem Yikom Damo, from Rav Moshe Meiselman. You have a relationship with Rav Aaron Lopiansky. And there is this image of a real rabbi is somebody who is a massive scholar, Talmud Chacham, and is giving over Torah at the very highest level. And people who you were exposed to and inspired you. And now here you are, many decades later, and my guess is that you don't have an audience where you can teach Torah at the very highest level. And my guess is you spend more time planning Hanukkah parties and Purim parties for the shul than preparing, an in-depth Gemara shir or Talmud shir to give over to the shul. How do you avoid, when you look in the mirror, saying, I'm not doing the real thing? How do you avoid looking in the mirror and saying, a real rabbi is a Rosh Hashiva, a real rabbi, that you take yourself seriously, even though the work you're doing, it's not really a straight line from yeshiva. And I sometimes feel this myself, like I learned at a very high level, and sometimes I look at the work I'm doing and I'm like, this isn't the real thing. The real thing is to give a serious shir and create, build Talmidim and all of that. That's the language and the environment that we grew up in and that we ourselves, you and I, are both products of. We learned in serious yeshivas. How do you avoid that very, I want to use the word rigid, not in a negative way, but that very fixed image of what a rabbi and what rabbinic success and what you're supposed to be doing every day looks like, and the actual life that you lead now? How do you avoid that dissonance or that sense of like, what am I doing here? Am I just like a camp counselor?
There's a lot in that question, and I guess I would say two things. I mean, first of all, I do want to say that there's so much room for growth for a Ben Torah in the rabbinate, because I'll give you an example. When I was in Portland, I had gotten smicha from Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg when I was in Eretz Yisrael, but I got smicha from Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz around 2008 when I was in Portland. I made some trips to Chicago, and I learned that the sugya, the topic that we learned, was Geirus, conversion. And I learned it inside, and he gave me all sorts of sources, Gemaras, Tshuvas, Chaim Ozer-Gurjansky.
Sure, there's a famous tshuva about it, sure.
And so on the one hand, I was like living in that learning, right? But I was also living in the questions of intermarried couples and non-Jewish couples. And so like I lived Geirus, I lived that sugya. and I also got to learn it. So I do think that there is a very big opportunity for growth, coming into a situation here, like helping the long term. So I think that there is a lot of room for a person to grow. I would just say, though, that as far as the rabbinate, I think that being a Rosh Hashiva was never really something that I saw in my future.
No, but if you're a rabbi in the 5 towns,
right,
what are you doing? You're giving super high level
right.
shiurim. You're doing smichas chaver.
Right.
Or, this is the mark. Our community is so educated, so deeply knowledgeable that the rabbi is like these superstars.
Right, and I think that hopefully that opportunity is there over time. I think, though, that to me what the real heart and soul of the rabbinate is that you're in the trenches with Am Yisrael. You're in the trenches. I mean, last week I actually was with a Jewish person who was being sentenced to prison. I was in court with him. I spoke to the judge. I was sitting there with a Jew in a very difficult moment. And to me, what that moment embodied for me was just the idea that the rabbinate is about being in the trenches with the people where they are. And of course you want to learn, and God willing, you'll be able to teach on a high level. But if you can be with the people in the trenches of their lives, if you can be present in their lives, that is the place that you are going to impact and touch people's lives. The Midrash Rabbah and Shmos Rabbah teaches us that Moshe had, when he was the Roe Tzon, when he was the shepherd of Yisro's flock, one little lamb ran away, and Moshe ran after it and found that lamb drinking, and Moshe knew it was thirsty, picked it up and carried it back to the flock. So the Midrash says, this is the rachamim that you have for the flock of flesh and blood, chayecha, by your life. I'm going to make you the shepherd of my flock of Israel. And so when God chose Moshe, according to this Midrash, to be the shepherd of Israel, it wasn't that moment that he was giving Shir Klali. It was when he literally went after that lamb,
picked up a sheep,
picked it
and
up,
gave it water,
and carried it back to the flock. And so I can't think of anything more holy than that type of work, of really being with people in the trenches of Jewish life.
You are absolutely right, and that was the answer that I find so moving. Why I schlepped out to Manalapan, New Jersey. Why? Because this is a Yiddishkeit that a lot of major Jewish communities have totally forgotten, and they think it doesn't exist anymore. They think we won, and they kind of if you're not living in these major Jewish areas, that this is the Yiddishkeit that I remember Bubby and Zadie's house. When there were we go to Friendly's and not be able to order the toppings.
Right.
That was the Yiddishkeit that I grew up with. And there's something very moving, because it's not a joke and it's not a performance to you, that you really believe and you've dedicated to your life, that the real rabbinate, the real work is Manalapan, New Jersey. It's not a b'diavad. It's not one day, I'll be able to give that shir klali. No, this is mamish the real work. And it's so moving to me, because it's the holiest work, because you're in people's lives, showing them organically, because they're the ones ultimately doing the real work, the religious growth, but showing them all the neon entrance signs and just hanging them on all the walls and showing up and being present. My last question for you is really advice to other rabbis. I mean, I definitely have noticed rabbis more and more do not like moving out of town, especially, in the major yeshivas. You want a major kehila, a major shul, and where, 5 restaurants and all of this. What's the case you would make to young Jewish leaders, young couples, young rabbis, of the beauty of a small town community like Manalapan, whether it's literally Manalapan? I'm not asking you to pitch your community,
right?
But what's the Jewish life that you get to witness, that people who grew up like myself, I live in Teaneck, I grew up in Lawrence, that we may not be able to pay attention or experience?
Right. Well, look, it certainly is a makom she'ein ish, right? It's a place where there aren't others to do. And I think that there is something so powerful about living with the people. It's not like I don't drive home at night. And I mean, I think that we tend to run a lot of programs, and sometimes we'll get we'll run a big program. We'll have 180 people there, and it'll be wonderful. We'll connect with people and hopefully get them to sign up to learn. And maybe it's something we write an article about in the Jewish Link. But not everything that we run is newsworthy. And I think that it's so important that you can be present with the people that are in front of you and value those people, because if you really believe in Torah, then every one of those lives is holy. And I think that when you're in the trenches, in the rabbinate, when you're in a place like, whether it's Manalapan, whether it's Portland, Richmond, Virginia, wherever it is, I think that you have an entrance into people's lives. It's a long-term thing. It's not one drasha. It's 10 years of drashas. It's not one simcha. It's being involved in people's lives over years.
And there's room for you, meaning in the
There's
tri-state
room.
area, any one person, they're friends with 20 rabbis,
Right.
everybody, they know the principal, they know each of their kids' rabbi,
Right. And I just had a couple, a kollel couple stay with me a couple weeks ago that are in a larger Jewish community. They're sort of saying, we want to get to a place where we can impact. And I really cannot think of a more impactful place. I'm grateful every day that I wake up to be in the rabbinate, to be here, and whichever Jew I can get in front of, and sometimes it's a couple hundred, and sometimes it's 10 or 2. And but that's something that really, really makes an impact. Something I saw with my own rebbeim was how much they valued the individual. And I think that this is a space where you really can touch lives for the long term.
I've always been so moved by your work. We know each other for so many years, and just the way that you approach Jews, what I call begova einayim, just like eyes wide open exactly where you are, but not giving up on having the faith and the emunah, that you have such a journey ahead of you, and it's going to be so exciting. And it's your journey. It's not the rabbi's journey. Like you don't superimpose yourself on other people's lives. You're pointing at all the neon signs and you're hanging them up. It's incredibly moving, and I'm so grateful for your time to speak today. I always wrap up my interviews with more rapid fire, and I wanted to throw them at you. I'm curious, do you have a go-to book, your favorite book that you give to congregants? Introduction to Judaism.
Well, certainly Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, the Aryeh Kaplan anthology is great.
Oh, sure.
That is something, not necessarily for congregants. I do think that Rabbi Emanuel's Tales Out of Shul is a great.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said that. Rabbi Emanuel
Yeah.
Feldman has a book called Tales Out of Shul about his early years in Atlanta.
Yes.
And it had a huge impact on me, you should know.
Right.
Huge.
Yes. But as far as congregants, Aryeh Kaplan is a good entry point. I do find that the Book of Our Heritage from Eliyahu Kitov is great.
His father was a student of Rav Tzadok,
Right.
so I love him.
Right. But you know what? I've done a lot with the Ramchal with people, or Maharal.
Wow.
Or certainly tremendous amount with Tanakh. So there's ample opportunity out there.
Absolutely incredible. My next question, if somebody gave you a great deal of money and allowed you to take a sabbatical with no responsibilities whatsoever to go back to school, get a PhD, what do you think the subject and title of your dissertation would be?
It's funny. I mean, I love American history. I have that background. I mean, the Constitution is fascinating to me. The American explorers are fascinating to me. I guess if I was being really practical, maybe I would get a PhD in organizational development so that I could help other.
But your love is American history.
I do. I definitely love that for sure. It would be, that's definitely an area where there's a lot of room for exploration, and it's very timely.
That is absolutely incredible. My final question, my last question. I'm always curious about people's sleep schedules. What time do you go to sleep at night, and what time do you wake up in the morning?
I try to shut the light off by on a weeknight, by 11, and I'm usually up, before 6:30. So I strive for a healthy life. If I can get 7.5 hours of sleep, that's great.
Rabbi Brodkin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Reb David, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.